I remember the moment the sky went quiet. We were already on our way home when it happened. The engines were still roaring at full power, the frame of the B-29 humming beneath my boots, but somehow, everything felt like it had been turned down. The city below us had been a constellation used an hour before, streets like bands of light, tiny moving points that in were lives, families, children. Now there was only a shape. A wound. No firestorm like the ones I'd seen over other cities, no rolling sea of orange. Just a boiling, rising column and a circle where sound itself seemed afraid to exist. I was standing behind the pilot's seat, one hand gripping the backrest so hard my knuckles turned white inside the glove. The radio was spitting out words, static, calcines, but it all felt far away. I couldn't stop staring through the glass. I watched roofs and streets dissolve into something colorless, like chalk smeared by a careless hand. Smoke rose, not in scattered plumes, but in a single, terrible stalk that climbed straight into the sky. It looked like the world had punched all through itself. Someone said something over the interphone. I saw lips move in front of me, the captain glancing sideways, the bombardier turning in his seat, but for a few seconds I couldn't hear them. My mind was trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing, and it couldn't. I had seen burning cities. I had watched fear crawl along neighborhoods like a living thing. I had heard anti-aircraft guns speak in angry bursts beneath us. But this was a city that had gone from living to silent in seconds. Not dying, not burning, not screaming. Just gone. None of us understood, in that frozen moment, how much that silence would follow us. I didn't know then that those seconds, looking down through the glass, would be the ones I'd never escape. If you're still here after hearing that, stay with me. And before I go on, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and subscribe to this channel. I need to know I'm not speaking into the void. To understand how we ended up in that sky, watching an entire city fall silent in seconds, we have to go back to when the engines were just machines to me, and not echoes I still hear at night. I wasn't born into the sky. I was born into dust. My earliest memories are of wheat fields stretching into a flat horizon and the hot wind of the Midwest coming through them. We lived near a small town you'd miss if you blinked on the highway. The biggest sounds in my world back then were cicadas, the whizzing of our old truck, and my father's boots on the wooden porch. War belonged to newspapers, headlines that made his jaw tighten when I read them at night. The first time I saw a plane up close, I was 12. It was a crab dust, yellow and chipped, but the way it came low over the field, the way the air shuddered around it, that stayed with me. The pilot could then hint after landing and climbed down, goggles on his forehead, hair met with sweat. I left with my father like they were old soldiers, though neither of them had ever been to war. He stood there, staring at the plane, at its wings, at the propeller glinting in the sun, and something in me decided, if the world was going to pull itself apart, he wanted to be up there when it did. By the time I enlisted, the headlines had become telegrams. Boys from our town left and came back in wooden boxes, or didn't come back at all. My father didn't argue when he told him. He just looked at me for a long time, his fingers tightening around the mag in his hand. My mother wiped her hands on her apron and turned away, pretending to fuss with dishes so we wouldn't watch her cry. Just come back in one piece, my father said. And don't you dare get yourself killed on purpose trying to be a hero. I told him he wouldn't. At the time, he believed it. Training took that small town boy and ground him into something sharper. We learned the names of airplanes before we learned the names of the men we would fly with. B-17S, B-24S, and 10, whispered with a trace of reverence and fear, the B-29. The Superfortress. Bigger, eager, faster. Pressurized cabins. Longer range. There was always an edge in the instructors' voices when they talked about it, like the plane itself carried a secret. The first time I walked up to one, the hangar lights turned its silver skin into a mirror. It looked less like a plane and more like a promise, or a threat. 4 engines, propellers resting still, waiting. I ran my hand along the fuselage, feeling rivets under my fingers. Someone had stenciled a name near the nose in bold letters. Most crews did that, gave their floating machines personalities, clamped them like totems against that stacked in the sky. We learned to live inside that steel tube. You didn't just sit in a B-29, you inhabited it. You learned every sound, the healthy growl of the engines, the change in pitch when one strand, the vibration of the frame when the air got rough. We practiced climbs, bombing runs, emergency procedures. We spent nights in briefings, eyes burning under bad coffee and the glow of maps, tracing lines across oceans toward names of islands we had never heard spoken at home. When they moved us closer to the war, the air itself felt different. Humid, heavy, smelling of fuel and salt. The ground crews moved like ants under the bellies of our planes. We kept hearing the same word more and more, decisive. We were told that what we were doing would shorten the war. Sabe lives. And it. You can believe that and still feel a stone in your throat when you look down. Our missions started with other cities. We the take off in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the rainbow lights slide beneath us, then climb until the world below was a patchwork quilt. We saw towns in the distance like islands of light. We saw ships strolling with scar-stroke black water. We saw fear reach up like angry fingers and fall short. And we saw burning. Fear didn't look like fear from altitude. It was slower, more deliberate. It crawled. It spread like ink on paper. The first team showed an entire district burning after a ride. I remember thinking it looked almost beautiful, a terrible, guilty thought that felt like a stand the second it formed. I never said it out loud. I carried it like I carried my flight gear. The briefings changed as the months went by. The language changed, though. Not used, targets, and runs, but special ordnance, demonstration, maximum effect. There was a mission we weren't allowed to talk about. We were introduced to officers who didn't wear the same expressions as the others. They looked like men who had learned to live with monsters and shake their hands. The morning of that mission, the sky was so clear. We were told it was important. We were told it meant things. We were told as little as possible. The plane felt the same when I climbed aboard, same cold metal under my boots, same smell of oil and canvas and men so familiar with each other to bother with politeness. But underneath, there was a sound that didn't come from the engines. Attention! The bombardier avoided our eyes. The pilot was quieter than usual. I checked my station twice, then a third time, as if another inspection might reveal some answer no one was giving us. We climbed. The world below shrank. Clouds drifted beneath us like islands of cotton. At altitude, you could almost forget there were people down there at all. Almost. When the target came into view, it was just another city. From that height, they all looked like the same fragile pattern, rivers like bands, roads like scars, roofs like skulls. I pressed closer to the glass, watching the ships harden as we approached. Rail yards. Bridges. Districts that might be factories, might be homes. The line between the two was thinner up there than any of us wanted to admit. The run itself felt off. Too calm. The flag was lighter than we expected. The sky felt empty, the defense, thinner. No swarm of fighters rising to tear at us. Used our formation, engines droning, shadows crawling across the city below. The bomb bay doors opened. I heard the hydraulics, felt the subtle change in the plane's belly. The bombardier's voice came over the interphone, tiny and tight. Numbers. Headings. Distance. Then a word we'd heard 100 times before, but that would never sound the same again, not after that day. Bombs, away. I had watched bombs fall before. You could trace them sometimes, dark seeds dropping toward the ground, followed seconds later by blooms of fire and smoke. This time, I couldn't see them. I only saw the city. For a teeny sliver of time, nothing happened. Then the world below us folded. I don't have a better language for it. A flash, so bright it didn't seem like light so much as the absence of something else. It swallowed the center of the city. Not red, not orange, but white, a white that carried its own shadow. I saw roofs lift like they were made of paper. I saw something rise, straight up, like the earth had grown a spine and thrusted toward the heaven. And then, in the middle of our engine noise and instruments and human breath, the city went quiet. Not the way a city looks at night, when lamps go out and people sleep. This was sudden. Streets that held cars and bicycles and morning routines simply vanished in a spreading circle. The glow changed, from unbearable white to a kind of sickening, growing smear. There were no individual fires yet, no separate lines. Just a wound. Someone swore into the interphone. Someone else said, "My God, what is that?" The pilot kept his hands on the yoke, knuckles bone white, eyes flicking between the horizon and the nightmare below. I realized my mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. As we banked away, the cloud was already climbing, the shape of it round in a way I felt in my gut. It wasn't the rolling billow of a factory heat, or the sprawled chaos of a firestorm. It was vertical. Intentional. Like a pillar being built in seconds. I watched the edges of the city, where roofs still stood, where streets still ran straight. Even there, something had changed. The light was gone. Not just dimmed, gone. It was as if a hand had passed over the place and turned the volume of life all the way down. None of us said it and, but I think we all felt it, something in the world that shifted under our feet, and we were still in the air, with nowhere to land but the future it had just created. If you're still listening, promise me one thing, subscribe. Not for me, but so these memories don't die with me. They tried to bury a lot of what we show. I'm only telling it because you're still here to hear it. Back at the base, the sky looked wrong. We touched down like we had after dozens of missions. Wheels hitting runway, engines rattling back, the weight of the B-29 settling onto its steers. Ground crews ran toward us, phase subturned, some shielding their eyes as if we still carried that flash with us. The engine noise faded, replaced by shouts, metal clanking, vehicles approaching. Inside, no one moved for a few seconds. The pilot finally unstrapped, shoulders sagging under invisible weight. The bombardier's hands shook as he took off his headset. One of the gunners crossed himself slowly, lips moving around upper he pretended not to notice. When he stepped off the ladder onto solid ground, my legs felt less certain than when we were still in the air. They had hit me first, humid, heavy, sick with the smells of fuel, oil, sweat. But under it, there was something else. A kind of anticipation. People moving faster than usual. Officers clustered together, talking low. A courier running from one building to another with a folder clutched to his chest. We were debris-fed, like always. Except it wasn't like always. The room was smaller. Fewer chairs. The officers waiting for us weren't the same ones we saw in normal post-mission interrogations. They wore the same uniforms, but their eyes carried something the others didn't, a calculation that didn't end with the day sortie. They asked about altitude, headings, timing. They asked about the defenses we'd seen, the visibility, the cloud cover. They asked everything you would expect. They didn't ask how it felt to watch a city disappear. At one point, one of them looked at me and said, "From your station, what did you observe at the moment of detonation?" I opened my mouth. For a second, what wanted to come out was the truth. I observed the end of the world, sir. I observed the nearest version of hell a man can see with his eyes still open. Instead, he said, "A very bright flash, sir. Then rapid cloud formation. The city went dark." I wrote something down. The scratch of his pen sounded unnaturally loud. We were told, very clearly, that we had done something significant. That this would shorten the war. That countless lives, on both sides, had been spared by what we had just carried out. We were reminded of the numbers from previous campaigns, of firebombed cities and casualty estimates. We were also told, in words that left no room for misinterpretation, that we were not to discuss details outside the authorized channels. "You flew the mission," one of the ranking officers said. "History will handle the rest." History, I've learned, is a poor listener. The nights afterward stretched like rubber. I lay in my bunk, staring up at the beams, listening to the snoring breaths of the other men. When I closed my eyes, I saw the city again and again, not as lines on a map, not as a target code, but as that moment, the sudden subtraction of light. In the mess hall, conversations rose and fell around me. Some men tried to make jokes about it, sin and brittle attempts at gallows humor that dropped to the table like broken glass. Others stayed quiet. The mission had given us a new kind of silence, inside and out. Days passed. The bar's story outside our little island marched forwarding headlines and bulletins. Words like surrender began to hang in the air. Some men cheered. Some used exhaled for the first time in months. Others, like me, found no place to put what we felt. I kept seeing details my mind had seized on in those seconds above the city, a bridge just at the edge of the blast, frozen in my memory with a single truck on it, a curve of river that flashed as the light hit it, a cluster of small roofs near the outskirts that I imagined belonged to families who had no idea their lives were being measured in seconds by men miles above them. They told us, later, the name everyone else would use for what we delivered. They saw charts, photographs, maps. They called it a weapon. They called it necessary. They called it inevitable. They never called it by what it looked like from where he stood, silence. When the war ended, they sent us home. You'd think stepping off the train back in my hometown would feel like waking up from a long, loud dream into peace. The fields were still there. The sky was still wide. My father's boots still sounded like my father's boots on the porch, and my mother still wiped her hands on her apron when she cried. People asked me what it had been like up there. They wanted stories about flying, about danger, about brotherhood. Some wanted to hear about the enemy, about what they looked like from above. A few asked about specific missions, about rumors they'd heard regarding new bombs and cities wiped out in one strike. He told them about the engines. It was safer. The engines are so loud you feel them in your bones, I they say. You get so set to the vibration that when you finally step back onto solid ground, you miss it for a second. It was true, as far as it went. It just wasn't the truth that mattered. They didn't see the way my jaw tightened when a light flickered unexpectedly in town at night, how my heart skipped when power went out during a summer storm and the streets felt dark à la 11. They didn't know that sometimes, when the radio crackled in our kitchen, I heard not music or news, but the echo of the interphone that day, and the words I didn't manage to say. Some nights, my father would sit beside me on the porch, both of us watching the sun bleed out behind the fields. He never pressed. He never demanded stories. He used ask 11, in a voice that didn't sound like the man he had watched my whole life, you show some things, didn't you? I did, he said. He nodded, eyes still on the horizon. I suppose I leave it to you to decide what to do with them. For a long time, I decided to do nothing. I married. I worked. I raised children who grew up in a world that talked about the war like it was a story with a beginning, a middle and an end. Textbooks turned cities into paragraphs. Photographs became something you saw in classrooms. Documentaries narrated by calm voices over black and white footage filled in the blanks for those who had never smelled burning metal. I avoided those programs. When I couldn't avoid them, I watched in silence, hands clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles ached. They showed mushroom clouds, aerial views, rubble, survivors. They showed maps with arrows that made the war look almost tidy. What they never showed was the moment in between, the slice of time when a city is still itself and already lost. That's the part only a handful of us ever really show. That's the part I carried alone, for years. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already know more than most. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, not for numbers, but so this testimony don't drown in everything else you scroll past. You might be wondering why I'm telling you all this now, after years of silence. The truth is simple, the engines have finally quieted in my head enough for other sounds to be heard. Like the way my granddaughter asked me once, out of nowhere, if he had ever been scared in an airplane. Or how he saw a video online, a glowing, polished clip talking about tactical brilliance and necessary force without once acknowledging the lives under that brilliance. You see the war from the ground. You see it in photographs, in ruins, in stories told by those who walked among the ashes. That view is terrible enough. But there is a particular kind of horror in seeing it from above. In knowing that with the flick of switches, with the opening of doors you can't even see from the street, an entire city can be pushed off some invisible edge. I remember the sound of my own breathing more clearly than the engine noise in those seconds over the city. I remember the way my gloved fingers dug into the frame of the cockpit. I remember Simeone's voice, I still don't know whose, whispering, Jesus, not as a prayer, but as a stand exhale. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, it isn't the flashes I feared. It's the seconds before it. The city intact. The roads. The bridges. The quiet efforts of people who had no idea a plane miles above them already carried the shape of their absence. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't ask you to excuse it. I'm not telling you this to argue that we had no choice, or that it saved more lives than it took. Others can fight over those numbers. All I'm offering you is a witness. Above the clouds, in a steel machine built by hands that would never see the place city rest, I watched an entire city fall silent in seconds. And no matter how many years pass, no matter how many justifications are printed, that silence still speaks louder than anything they said in those briefings. If you felt anything while listening to this, leave a comment. Tell me what you heard in this story. Maybe your words will be the only proof that I wasn't used talking to the darkness.